June 1944. The Normandy coast. A fortress stretching for kilometres, carved into the very bones of France. 18 kilometres inland, buried beneath thick reinforced concrete, Oberführer Hans Richtor stood alone inside his underground command post. The air smelled of damp stone and cold iron. A single dim bulb swung gently above a table cluttered with maps, pencils, and field telephones. And then he heard it. A sound that should not exist. Not artillery, not engines, not naval bombardment. A high-pitched electronic pulse carried through the telephone line. Unnatural, rhythmic, mechanical. Richtor froze. For 30 years he had listened to the sounds of war. Tanks grinding across frozen plains. Howitzers shaking the earth. The metallic thunder of naval guns. But this sound was none of those. It was new. And new things in war were dangerous. He lifted the receiver closer to his ear. Static crackled, followed by the tense voice of his northern coastal observer. Massive structures approaching the shore. Unknown type, unknown purpose. They're moving in formation. Richtor's blood ran cold. He said nothing at first, because he knew what he was hearing was impossible. Hans Richtor was not a typical SS officer. He was not a politician, not a fanatic. He was an engineer, a man of calculations, angles, tensile strength, load distribution, a man who believed in numbers more than ideology. When the Wehrmacht recalled him in 1942, it was not for his loyalty, it was for his intellect. They assigned him to the 12th SS Panzer Corps for strategic engineering analysis. He had inspected fortifications across Europe. He had mapped firing arcs across the Norwegian fjords. He had walked the Spanish cliffs with notebooks full of geometric formulas. And for 2 long, exhausting years, he had helped plan and refine the Atlantic Wall, a defensive line 2,700 kilometers long, the greatest coastal fortification in human history. Concrete was his language. Steel was his certainty. But now, on this silent June morning, that certainty began to fracture. A pattern emerges. At 6:15, the first strange report arrived. He logged it, measured it, dismissed it as misidentification. But then, a second report came. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth. 5 different observation posts along the coast, each staffed by trained men, each equipped with optical rangefinders and calibrated instruments, were all reporting the same impossible sight. Large rectangular structures, 60 meters by 200 meters, weight thousands of tons, being positioned by tugboats, no visible armament. Richtor stared at the tactical map on the wall. His pencil hovered above the paper. Nothing in German naval intelligence matched this description. Nothing in their predictions allowed for this. And nothing in the German worldview made room for the idea that the Allies might attempt to build something the textbooks called impossible. The operations officer approached. "Sir, what is the observer seeing?" Richtor didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure he could. He was doing the math in his head, calculating volume, estimating displacement, projecting towing speed, assessing possible structural purpose. Finally, he spoke, quietly, almost reluctantly. "He is seeing construction." The officer frowned. "Construction? Of what? There's nothing on the coast to repair." Richtor wrote faster in his notebook. "That is precisely the point," he murmured. "They are not repairing anything because they are bringing something with them. At 7 o'clock, position 5 confirmed. Structures anchoring. 4-point system. Estimated anchoring time 90 minutes per structure. Richtor stopped writing. 90 minutes to anchor a 6,000-ton floating platform? Impossible. No navy in the world could deploy something like that in real time. Unless it wasn't improvised. Unless it was prefabricated. Unless the Allies had solved a problem German engineers had dismissed as unthinkable. By 7:45, the reports expanded. Secondary platforms attached. Floating pontoons rising and falling with tide. By 8:30, steel bridges connecting platforms. Flexible joints accommodate wave motion. By 9:45, component standardization confirmed. All structures identical. The room grew silent. 5 independent observers. 5 identical descriptions. Standardization meant one thing: assembly. Not construction, assembly. Mass assembly. Richtor felt his stomach tighten. He rose from his desk and walked to the wall map. He traced the coastline with his finger. 1 harbour. 2 harbours. Maybe more. The Allies weren't improvising. They were executing a plan that must have taken months, maybe years, to conceive, design, test, manufacture, and pre-position. A plan so bold that German commanders never even considered it possible. At 10:30, the Northern Observer sent the transmission that shattered Richtor's world. 4th structure in position. Assembly speed accelerating. 90 minutes, 87 minutes, 85 minutes, 84 minutes. Teams improving, a rhythm forming, a system emerging. Richtor's pencil snapped in his fingers. He stared at the numbers. If the Allies continued at this speed, if weather held, if tugboats sustained the tempo, they could complete an operational harbour in less than 10 days. And if 2 harbours were being built, 14,000 tons of supplies per day. 14,000 tons. Enough to supply an entire army. Enough to break the German defensive strategy in half. By 12 o'clock, Richtor called an emergency staff meeting. He laid out the sketches, calculations, observations. His officers listened in stunned silence. Finally, the logistics officer whispered, "If these harbours work, the invasion cannot be stopped." Richtor nodded, because he already knew it. The German defensive strategy, the strategy he had spent years refining, was collapsing in front of him. Not from artillery, not from tanks, not from infantry, but from industrial genius, from engineering creativity, from the ability to imagine something the German command considered impossible. Noon approached over Normandy. Inside the underground bunker, the air felt heavier than the concrete above it. The officers sat in uneasy silence, the echo of Richtor's calculations still hanging in the room like smoke. Richtor himself stood rigidly before the wall map, listening as the field telephone rang again. He already knew what this next message would say, and yet, when he lifted the receiver, when he heard the strained voice of his observer, a chill still curled down his spine. 6th structure in position. Movement highly coordinated. Allies accelerating deployment sequence. Richtor closed his eyes. The impossible was no longer impossible. It was happening. For decades, Richtor had studied fortifications, medieval walls, Napoleonic bastions, modern concrete defences. He had memorised the logistics of siege warfare, the mathematics of supply throughput, the history of amphibious landings. Nowhere in the books, nowhere in the theories, nowhere in 3,000 years of military history was there an example of what the Allies were doing. They were not repairing a port. They were not capturing a port. They were bringing their own port with them, piece by piece, component by component, caisson by caisson, like assembling a vast mechanical skeleton across the sea. The idea was so bold it bordered on madness, and yet, and this was the part that shook Richtor the most, the Allies executed it with an industrial calm, as if assembling a machine they had built 100 times before. Each new report confirmed it. Standardization, modularity, precision, repetition. These were not constructions. These were products, mass-produced, numbered, shipped, assembled, like military-scale engineering kits designed for war. Richtor whispered to no one in particular. This is industrial warfare. Not tactical, not operational, industrial. And Germany, he knew, could not match that. When the officers gathered around the long steel table, Richtor laid out his calculations with a quiet finality. The intelligence officer, there is no record of such a project in Allied shipyards, not in any reports. Richtor, there is now. The logistics officer, what capacity if fully assembled? Richtor didn't check his notes. He had done the math too many times already. 7,000 tons per day, per harbour. The room froze. Even the buzzing lamp overhead seemed to pause. 2 harbours, 14,000 tons a day. That number hung in the air like a death sentence. Germany's entire defensive strategy relied on one assumption, that the Allies could not sustain prolonged operations without capturing a deep-water port. But the Allies had just rewritten the rules. No one spoke, no one argued, no one questioned, because the precision of the reports eliminated all doubt. At last, the operations officer whispered, "If they can supply that much, the invasion is permanent." Richtor nodded. The invasion was no longer a raid. It was no longer a gamble. It was the beginning of an unbroken offensive. A machine fed by industrial arteries stretching back across the Atlantic. The Atlantic Wall had been designed to stop an army. It had not been designed to stop an entire industrial civilization. By 1400, another report arrived. The 5th structure in the British sector had locked into position. Anchor chains tightened. Ballasting valves engaged. Floating roadways extended outward like the arms of a colossal steel spider. Each report reinforced the same truth. The Allied engineers were not experimenting. They were not improvising. They were performing a rehearsed operation, one perfected long before D-Day. Richtor gazed at the map, and for the first time in his life as a military man, he felt small. Germany had fought wars with steel, ammunition, and courage. The Allies fought with something else: industry, planning, scale, vision. They did not merely respond to problems. They anticipated them, solved them, designed around them, mass-produced the solutions. He read the reports again. Identical anchor systems, identical ballast mechanisms, identical bridge components, identical floating pierheads. Every part was standardized. Every part replaced centuries of custom harbour engineering. Every part made the impossible routine. This was not innovation by genius. This was innovate by industry, and Germany could never replicate it. By 1600, Richtor stood alone. Officers rested, telephones went quiet. The bunker dimmed into its late afternoon hush. He sat with the German strategic assessment document, the one every commander carried. And he read the line Germany had believed in with absolute certainty. Enemy supply line cannot be sustained without a captured port. Invasion will fail within 2 weeks due to logistical collapse. 2 weeks. That had been the prediction, the certainty. A certainty now shattered. He whispered the numbers to himself. 100 caissons, 6,000 tons each. 600,000 tons of specialized components. Then he whispered the number that killed all German hope. American steel production, 1944, 15 million tons. Almost twice Germany's output. Built while fighting a global war on multiple continents. And from that surplus, from that ocean of steel, the Allies had chosen to build a harbour. 2 harbours, just to ensure the invasion could not fail. Germany had no such capacity. Its factories were strained. Its railways bombed. Its refineries burning. Its industrial heartland crippled. Germany made weapons. The Allies made systems. Germany made tanks. The Allies made the factories that made the tanks. Germany fought battles. The Allies fought a war of supply, and they fought it better than anyone had in history. At 22 o'clock, Richtor finished his final technical report. It was precise, cold, mathematical, unemotional, because numbers did not care who read them. His conclusions were brutal. The Atlantic Wall's assumptions were obsolete. Germany's strategy depended on supply-starving the Allies. Mulberry harbours eliminated that possibility. Germany had no countermeasure. The invasion would not fail. Germany would lose the war of logistics. Richtor knew what the High Command would do. They would review it, annotate it, discuss it, argue about it, and by the time anything changed, the American and British harbours would already be fully functional. Germany would have lost its last chance to stop the invasion on the beaches. Hans Richtor, military engineer, 30 years of service, 2 decades of experience, and now the man who realised, too late, that Germany had been fighting the wrong kind of war. In the final accounting of World War II, history often focuses on the battles. The generals, the strategies, and the shifting borders carved by fire and steel. But behind every operation, behind every advance and retreat, were men who carried the burden of choices that few of us today can truly comprehend. Some marched forward knowing they might not return. Others held a line they knew could not be held. And many, too many, became names etched only in reports, diaries, and fading memories. Their courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet endurance, a kind of resilience that existed not in grand heroics, but in the simple will to survive one more hour, one more night, one more impossible order. When we look back now, from the safety of the present, it is easy to judge the decisions of the past. But those decisions were made by real people, men and women shaped by fear, loyalty, duty, desperation, and the hope that somehow their suffering might prevent an even darker future. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. War is not made of statistics. It is made of human lives, each one carrying a story that could have changed the world if it had continued. As we close this chapter, take a moment to reflect on the lives caught in the machinery of global conflict. Their sacrifices are not distant. Their stories are not forgotten. They are reminders, silent, powerful reminders, of what happens when nations clash, when ideologies collide, and when ordinary people are asked to bear extraordinary weight. History does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and understanding these stories is how we ensure that the next chapter of humanity is written with wisdom rather than regret. If you found value in this deep dive into World War II history, and if you want more long-form, cinematic, research-driven documentaries, then make sure to subscribe. Your support doesn't just help the channel grow, it allows these forgotten stories to remain alive, researched, restored, and retold with the respect they deserve. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, so you never miss the next episode in this ongoing journey through the hidden and untold chapters of the Second World War. Before you go, if you want to continue the experience, I recommend watching one of the documentaries appearing on your screen right now. On the left, you'll find a carefully selected episode that connects directly with the events we explored today, offering deeper context and a wider perspective. On the right, you'll find one of the most popular WW2 stories on this channel, a powerful, emotional journey that our viewers say you shouldn't miss. Whichever you choose, I'll meet you there. Let's continue exploring history together, one story at a time.